Hey, welcome to our Friday night weekly webinar. My name is Jerry Fetta. I'm the owner and founder of Wealth Dynamics. And if you're just tuning in for the first time, I want to welcome you to our webinar. And we are live streaming here on Facebook. We're on Zoom. We are on YouTube soon. Let me get Instagram plugged in really quick too. And I want to let you guys know what our topic is going to be tonight. Let me just get my Instagram snap figured out here. There we go. Instagram, that should be good. Okay, guys, so we're going to talk tonight about a topic on how to prevent our wealth from being stolen from. So if you're just tuning in, my name is Jerry. I'm the owner and founder of Wealth Dynamics. And I've been doing this course every single week for the last 3 years. Okay, and the reason for me doing this course is I want to help other people understand what I have learned to understand about money. Okay, money was a topic for me growing up. Didn't have any, didn't know much about it, didn't know how to get any of it. And what I started to notice and realize is as I started to pursue wealth and started trying to get money and trying to build wealth, it seemed like it was difficult. Like I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't get ahead. It seemed like if I saved, if I invested, if I worked harder, somehow it always felt like there was something making me, move slower, holding me back, taking longer, giving me resistance when I didn't need it. And so what I learned and what I realized later on in life was that there were four main things that were causing that. And I'm going to go over the first two of them tonight. Now, if you're watching this for the first time, we're talking about money. Okay. We're talking about money. That is the topic we're going over. And so if you have questions, leave those in the comments. Make sure they're financially related. Okay. If there's anything that I say that doesn't make sense, that goes over your head, that was too complex, that maybe, skipped a step and you didn't quite catch what we were going over, I want you to make sure you ask questions about that too. Okay. And then finally, only positivity here. We're here to learn. This is people on a Friday night, week before Christmas, that want to improve their finances. And so they're actually investing their time to do that. So make sure that we're respectful of that. If you're not interested, great. It's easy to stop watching. So guys, without further ado, we're going to talk about tonight's topic. Now, this is going to be, again, an excerpt from my book, How to Create Wealth. Okay. How to Create Wealth by Jerry Fetta. I'm Jerry Fetta. Okay. And so if you're watching this, this is what we're going to be reading out of, talking about. If you have a copy of it, follow along. Okay. If you do not have a copy of it, you can go to jerryfetta.com. You can get one for free. You cover your shipping. It's like $8. Okay. And then you can get the book shipped out to you. But we're going to be in How to Create Wealth, specifically on page 33. Okay. And page 33, the title of this chapter is Your Wealth is Being Stolen. Okay. Kind of cut and dry, like flat out, your wealth is being stolen. Now, what this means is that there's somebody taking amounts of our wealth, whether that be our income, whether that be, there's tons of things that it could be, but we're going to talk about two specific ones tonight. What this doesn't mean is that there's nothing we can do about it. Okay. What this doesn't mean is that we're financial victims and we just have to put up with it and life's just so hard and that's why we can never get ahead with money. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means there's something happening where wealth is being stolen from each and every one of us. Okay. And we can do something about it, but we have to understand what it is. Okay. And we have to understand all of the facts. So we're going to go into a couple areas tonight that are very maybe well-known, well talked about, but they can tend to be convoluted. Okay, convoluted means they can be easily confused. People can make them seem different than they actually are. Now, this is important in solving and handling this issue because if I don't actually some fun little piece of this is off, then the entire solution potentially is off. And that means bad things for me as somebody trying to solve this problem. So I want to read a couple of pieces from the book to you guys so we're on the same page and tracking. So again, this is How to Create Wealth by Jerry Fetta. I am Jerry Fetta. And we're going to read a little bit here. So the first one we're going to cover tonight is called inflation. Okay. So your wealth is being stolen from inflation. We have all heard of it. Okay. I believe that most do not actually understand what it is though. The first time I heard about inflation was in 7th or 8th grade. My older brother was talking about it. He described to me that inflation is when prices rise, right? So this is common. A lot of us think that's what inflation is, right? So we hear inflation, we think, okay, yeah, prices went up, right? So if you look at inflation, there are several definitions of it. I'm actually going to pull up Google and we're going to go through a couple of the definitions of inflation here live. Gotta love Dr. Google. You can ask him anything. Okay, definition of inflation. Okay, as I'm doing this, if you guys have definitions that you've heard, drop them in the comments. I can see what your thoughts are too. And then really quick before I forget, at the very end of this, we're going to do a live Q&A for anybody that's on Zoom. So if you have questions you want to get answered live tonight, let me know. Inflation, economics, a general increase in prices and fall in the purchasing value of money. Okay, so let's unpack that. Inflation is a general increase in the purchase price of goods and services. It means their costs went up, right? But then it also says something totally contradicting, and a fall in the purchasing value of money. It can't be both of those, right? Like prices can change because of both of those things, but inflation can't be both of them. Inflation is either an increase in the prices of goods and services. That would be a definition of inflation, and that would be it if that was the case. Or inflation would be a decrease in the value of the things that you're purchasing with, aka the dollar or whatever. You can't say inflation, both of those things, because it's got to be one or the other. Okay, so right off the bat, there's some confusion with inflation. Which one is it? It's either both of them, one of them, or none of them. So for me, I was very confused on what it was. So I thought inflation was the first definition. I went through most of my life thinking that things get more expensive as time goes on. Okay, till I became an adult and I started looking at some of these things that were supposedly getting more expensive. Okay, I want to whiteboard this one out for you so you can see it. If you guys are on Zoom or on Instagram, by the way, you're not going to see the whiteboard feature just because Instagram doesn't jive with it. So if you would like to see things like the whiteboard, you can go see our Zoom instead, and you'll be able to see all this stuff. But so I thought inflation meant goods and services go up in price. Okay, and this is the one that helped me finally realize that that wasn't the case. It's a very ugly house that I'm drawing here. Wow. So we're experiencing some mouse issues. Here we go. So I thought inflation was things going up in value. The one that made me realize that that wasn't the case was a house. Okay, I've lived in houses. I've lived without houses. One or the other doesn't matter to me. But I looked at the house and I was like, okay, so based on this definition of inflation, that means that a house goes up in price. And if I look at the real estate market, it definitely does. The prices of houses go up. Okay, but then I started to think about, but why? There's not less land. So it's not like less land is available, so people have to pay more for the existing land. It's been the same land the entire time. Okay. So it's like, so you guys see where I'm going with this. The price is not based on supply and demand. Like it's not a restriction of supply. All right. So then is it that the house became more valuable? So I started thinking about, well, what is a house made out of? Okay. A house is made out of wood and it's made out of metals, right? It's made out of paint, all things that deteriorate over time. All right. So if everything is on the house deteriorating over time, it didn't actually even become more valuable, because the older I have a house, the longer I have a house, the more dilapidated it becomes. Like utility speaking, that's less valuable if we're looking at it from that standpoint. So I started to then wonder, like, well, why are we saying it went up in price if the value of it didn't go up? Because it's actually worth less, just your utility value. I'm going to get better stuff with newer things, right? That's common with anything. Same thing with vehicles. Vehicles actually do operate that way, right? If I buy a car 10 years later, that car is not going to be worth as much as it was today. But why does a house not do that? So I started to study this and look at it, and I realized it was because I was wrong. It's the second definition. Okay, so the first definition we said was inflation is an increase in prices. Okay, but the second definition of inflation was it's a decrease in purchasing value. It means the things that we purchase with are worth less and less every year. Okay, now if this is the case, then a lot more things make sense, right? So if we start looking at it from that standpoint, and I want to sketch this out again, if we start looking at it from this standpoint of the value of the dollar, I don't know why my Zoom is doing this weird thing on the whiteboard. If we start looking at it from the standpoint of the value of the dollar is going down, right? So it's plummeting. Then it starts to look like, okay, we're working harder and harder and making less and less. I actually could think with that because I felt that way. Okay. At first I thought, well, things are getting more expensive, so I just need to work harder, right? Because that was the first definition of inflation. Everything's going up in price. I need to work harder. I need to produce more income. All logical conclusions, but the data that it was based on was incorrect. The reality was the dollar was going down in buying power. It could buy less and less things. And so I was working harder and harder and making the same or less money every time. Okay. Now here's how that would work. So if we start looking at it from that standpoint, it means that we have a fixed amount of dollars, right? So we have a fixed amount of dollars out there in the world. Let's say that we have 3 of them originally. We have 3 original dollars, right? Those 3 original dollars have value. That value is very easy to detect because there's 3 of these things. And we know what a dollar can buy and what it can't buy. Okay. But if we fast forward and then we start adding in more dollars, and we add in another dollar, and we add in another dollar, and we add in another dollar, and we just keep adding in more and more dollars. Okay. What's going to happen? We didn't add more value. We just added more dollars. So the existing value got diluted because of the additional dollars that were added. Do you guys see that? Like, and I thought about it when I was a kid. I used to freaking hate drinking watered down Kool-Aid. Okay. Who's ever had watered down Kool-Aid? Nasty. Tastes like cough syrup, right? Not even good. Like it's sour. But my parents didn't want me to have too much sugar, so they would water down the Kool-Aid. I would hate it. So I related it to that. I was like, okay, this thing with money is kind of like having a glass of Kool-Aid, right? And having the right amount in it. So we have, again, these original $3. That's the right amount of Kool-Aid, right? But then we add in extra water. We start adding in a bunch of extra water into this Kool-Aid. It ends up watering it down and it doesn't taste as good because it's diluted. Same thing happens with money. If we have original money and we start adding more money, it starts to water down the value of the existing money. And then it means that it's going to take more and more glasses of Kool-Aid to get the same drink taste that we used to get with one glass. It's going to take more and more dollars to buy the same things that we used to buy with the previous dollars. Okay. So this is called inflation. Now, it's important to understand inflation. It's been known as a hidden tax. And the reason why it's called a hidden tax is inflation is something that, again, reduces the buying power of our money. So we end up having to work more and we end up keeping and bringing home less in assets. When I say assets, I want to make sure that we're on the same page. Goods and services. What am I using my dollars for? I'm buying things with it. I'm buying vehicles. I'm buying food. I'm buying clothing. I'm buying transportation. I'm buying housing. So I'm able to bring home less and less of those things because the dollars that I work for do not buy as much. Okay, so it's a hidden tax. The same thing happens with taxes. If my taxes go up, then I'm bringing less home, then I can buy less of those things. Do you guys see the similarity there? When inflation is high, I bring home less in buying power and can't buy as many things. When taxes are high, I bring home less in actual dollars because taxes went out the door and I brought home a smaller net income so I could buy less of those things. Okay. So inflation is one of the things that eats away at our wealth. Now, the thing about inflation that I want to stress and really educate on today is where it comes from. Okay. Because it's almost this mystery, like nobody can really put their finger on it. Right. People will look at, well, there's not been any inflation and the Federal Reserve right now is going to print more money and lower more interest rates until they can get inflation up. I want you to realize that when you look at definitions, again, are very key in the finance world. I'm going to wipe my Zoom screen off really quick because there's something funky going on here. So you look at definitions of these things, and it's really important to understand the differences in these definitions. So we have inflation, right? And we just saw that inflation can mean one of two things, that things went up in price or that money went down in value. We're going to go with money went down in value because that actually makes the most sense, right? Like a gallon of milk is not worth more. There's actually like, it would be worth less today because it's easier and cheaper to produce. So inflation means the dollar went down. But inflation, usually they don't use the word inflation. They use a term called CPI. Okay. CPI means consumer price index. Okay. Now it's very easy to think that equals the same thing as inflation, but I want to go ahead and define this one as well. Consumer price index definition. All right. Consumer price index, an index of the variation in prices paid by typical consumers for retail goods and other items. So an index means it's a measuring stick of the variation, the changes in prices that the typical consumer will pay for retail goods and other items. So it's like you're saying, we're going to measure the change in price. Okay, here's these goods, these things that the average person will buy, and here's the average variation of their change in price across the entire United States. Okay, now there's so many outpoints there, I don't even know where to start. First things first, we have to look at, okay, with that definition, is that the same thing as inflation? No. We just saw inflation was one of two things: increase in price or reduction in value or buying power of money. We just said it's reduction of buying power and money. So therefore, if inflation is measuring the reduction in the purchasing power of the US dollar, and CPI is measuring the changes in the prices of goods and services that the average person would buy on a retail basis, United States wide, those are not the same thing. Okay. But most people measure inflation with CPI, Consumer Price Index. So they say, okay, the price of bread is this and the price of this is that. And these are all the goods and services. And based on the averages, like this is what inflation was. But they're not looking at, yeah, but what is the dollar's value? How much new money was introduced into the system? Okay. I saw a stat the other day. This will blow your mind. Anyone that understands economics. And if you don't, I'm going to explain this and simplify it. 40% of existing United States money was printed in 2020. Okay. That means, again, we said there was 3 original dollars, right? So that means we added a bunch more, right? At this point in time, if you look at, it's called monetary base, M1, M2, M2, M3, and M4, the different measures of levels of money that are in the system. The only real one really is monetary base, but these are basically like different echelons. When you look at all of the currency created, 40% of it was added in 2020. 40% of it, guys. We've had the United States dollar as a thing for hundreds of years. The current one we've had since 1971 as a non-gold backed dollar. So to say from 1971 to 2020, 40% of the existing dollars were added on the final year. Holy cow. Okay. But we're not measuring that. We're measuring Consumer Price Index. So we don't end up even seeing that. Okay. Now, where does this cycle actually fit in for our wealth and our finances? So when I learned this, and I've talked about this before, I had to first start with the question of where does money come from? Okay, because it doesn't come from, and I'm not talking about like production, I'm talking about currency, the paper dollar bills. It doesn't come from a job. Okay, production comes from a job, me going and producing value, that definitely does, and production is an exchange for the currency, but where does the actual currency come from? So it's not from a job because it doesn't start there. They don't counterfeit and print their own money. So I had to follow it back further. Okay, well, it doesn't come from a job. Does it come from a bank? Answer, kind of, but actually, no, it doesn't originate with a bank. Okay, banks actually do print their own money. They do create currency, but it's not the origin point. Okay, so where does it come from? It doesn't come from a bank. Does it come from a government? There, I thought I had the answer. I was like, oh, it must come from the United States Treasury. That must be where our money comes from, is the Treasury. Okay. And it turned out the answer was no. It didn't actually come from the United States Treasury either. Okay, now to give you some context, at the time I was asking this question, I was a financial advisor. I had passed my Series 6 license. I had passed my Series 63 license. I had my life insurance license, my health insurance license. I was studying for my Series 65. So I was a well-educated person in the field of finances. And I couldn't for the life of me answer the question, where does the US dollar as a currency originate? So I started doing some research, right? And what I realized was that it's not just the Treasury. There's another entity that doesn't get talked about in the capacity that it acts very often. And I'm going to kind of break this down. So we have the Treasury, then we have, I don't know why my Zoom is doing that. We have the Treasury, and then we have the U.S. Federal Reserve. This is a plus sign. We have the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank. Okay, so the United States Federal Reserve Bank. I didn't even know what this was, right? Like I was a financial advisor. I read about like the Federal Open Market Committee and how they set interest rates. I didn't know what the Federal Reserve Bank was, though. They didn't really talk about that. They might have mentioned there was one, but they didn't say what it was. Okay, so I started looking at, well, where does money originate from? And I realized it does not actually come from the Treasury. Okay, so, and this goes all the way back in 1913. We've talked about this before. In 1913, there was a law passed in Congress called the Federal Reserve Banking Act. Okay, the Federal Reserve Banking Act. It established a corporation called the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, again, we have to look at definitions. Let's break down the title. Federal makes us assume that it's government owned, right? When I say federal, you think government, right? So when we say Federal Reserve Bank, we think, oh, this must be the bank of the government. It's government owned. Actually, it's not. It's a completely independent entity. Okay. So we understand what a bank is. A bank is somewhere that we deposit and withdraw our money. Okay, nobody deposits or withdraws money from the Federal Reserve Bank, so it doesn't even meet the definition of a bank. Okay, definitions are super important, guys. We then look at reserve. Reserve makes us think that they have accumulated money, accumulated assets. They don't have that either. Over time they have, but when they were first started, they had zero. They didn't have seed money. There wasn't like nobody had money that they brought to the table. They hadn't been in business before. Okay, now the other thing is the word US. We hear US, we know that's the United States. So we think, okay, the United States government built this bank and that bank is there to help us. And that must be where money comes from. Okay. At the founding meeting at the Federal Reserve Bank, which was on Jekyll Island, which is an island off the coast of Georgia, there was a guy named Paul Warburg. Okay. Paul Warburg was a banker. Yeah, he was in the United States, but he was actually a plant for the Rothschilds, which were the European dynasty that owned literally every banking institution in Europe. So when we look at who founded it, we can look back and see, yeah, it is in the US, but this was heavily influenced by the banking dynasty outside the US and Europe called the Rothschilds. So it's not even a US-based system. Okay, if you actually do some research, we didn't have a Federal Reserve Bank until 1913. For spurts, we had one for a couple of years here and there. But we had a president, for example, if you want to look this up too, Andrew Jackson, his mission in life was to prevent the United States from getting a Federal Reserve Bank. Okay, he had several assassination attempts on his life. He's the only president in existence where in his presidency, we had a balanced budget and paid off all of the United States debt. Okay, so he was like this financially, like fiscally responsible guy. He's like, hey, we need to have our debt paid off. We need to have our budget balanced, and we're not going to have a bank running our country. That was his thing. On his gravestone, he literally put, I beat the banks. You can freaking Google that. Okay. So to show you the United States part, our government didn't actually want to have a bank. Okay. Woodrow Wilson was the one that passed this bill. He signed it into law in 1913. And after he signed it into law, I believe in 1915 or 16 or 17, one of those years, and you can Google this too, he has a quote that says essentially he betrayed his country and that the entire country was run by a group of private bankers that had no restriction, no regulation, no checks and balances. Okay. And then coincidentally, immediately after that, World War I starts, we get involved. We finance the entire thing, rack up a bunch of debt in our country, and it's never been the same since. So the cycle of this, we have this bank. I really hate that Zoom is doing this today, but we'll work through it. We have this bank, right? So we're going to say that this is the Federal Reserve Bank. We have the little pillars there. Sorry if my drawings look childish. It's because they are. But what happens is we have the United States Treasury. And when the United States government needs money, instead of issuing its own currency like it used to do, so it actually used to issue its own currency. When the U.S. needed money, the Treasury would print money. It would be our money. There'd be no interest attached to it. They didn't get it from anyone else. But what happened is we now have the Fed, short for Federal Reserve Bank. And when the Treasury needs money, in the financial world, they do something called creating a bond. Okay. For all of those that feel like that sounds fancy, it's because it does sound fancy. It's not actually fancy though. Creating a bond means they borrowed money. Okay. Technically, when I borrow money on a credit card, I've created a bond. Okay. When I buy a car then I finance it with the bank, I've created a bond, right? When I finance a house on a mortgage, I've created a bond. So just to give you context, borrowing money equals creating a bond. It's how wealthy old white guys say they didn't have money, so they had to borrow some. Okay. Just like issuing stock means I had to borrow money that I can't pay back or don't intend to pay back. So they borrow money from the United States Treasury by creating a bond. They say, we're going to create this bond. Treasury says, great, we're going to loan you this money. Okay, so they loan money to the Treasury. The Treasury now has money from the Fed. The Fed got the money out of nowhere. The Fed is charging the Treasury a 6% interest rate. Okay, so this is why inflation is a hidden tax. So we've added money into the system that has no value. It's backed by nothing. Okay, PPP loans were this. EIDL loans were this, right? Overnight repo loans to financial institutions that we've been doing since October of 2019 are a form of this. So we're increasing the pool of money. We're dumping more water in the Kool-Aid, which is diluting the buying power of the existing dollars so that we all end up working harder and harder and earning less and less in value, right? Now, the Treasury owes interest on all of this to the Fed. The Treasury has no revenue source. Okay, so think about if I'm a business. If I'm a business and I'm broke and I'm borrowing money because I'm broke, that's already not a good thing. Okay, now if I'm a business and I'm broke and I'm borrowing money because I'm broke, and also I'm operating at a deficit in my budget with negative cash flow, meaning I can't even afford to pay the interest on the money that I'm borrowing, that's even worse. In real life, my business would go out of business, right? Like I borrowed money because I didn't have any cash, then I couldn't afford to make the payments. Well, the Treasury, they owe this money back to the Fed. Like there's no question about it. There's no like, sorry, you can't pay it, we're going to forgive it. That's not how this works. They have to pay the Fed. So they pay a 6% rate to the Fed. They can't afford to pay that, so they have to raise taxes. This is the second thing that steals our wealth, income tax. Did you know income tax didn't exist prior to 1913? The IRS did not exist prior to 1913. What happened in 1913? The Federal Reserve Bank happened in 1913. Connection? I think yes. So the Fed loans money to the Treasury. The Treasury can't afford to pay the money back, so they have to instate income taxes. They collect the tax revenue from us. We're working for the money that was borrowed, which is going down and down and down and down and down in value. So we're working harder and harder and harder to get less and less and less because the Treasury keeps creating more money by borrowing from the Fed, which then they have to pay the interest on, which they can only do through collecting money from us on taxes. Okay. In the 1980s, there was something called the Grace Report. Okay. The Grace Report was an audit performed for Ronald Reagan as president. And in that report, it is an independent review of basically the United States government's budget. It said that before any public works or any wars or any stuff can happen, we actually have to have money left over, which we don't because 100% of it goes towards paying the interest on the money that the Treasury owes to the Fed. Meaning 100% of our income taxes, we're going to pay this, right? Now, the problem is like I said, the Treasury currently operates at a deficit of several $1 trillion, which means that they already can't pay it. So how do they pay it? Well, they borrow more. They borrow more so they can pay what they owed from last time. Now there's future money that they owe interest on as well, which they're not also going to be able to pay. So they're going to borrow more. And it just continues to snowball and get out and out of control. Who's ever experienced a credit card where the minimum payment you're making is not larger than the interest rate accruing on the card? Meaning the card is racking up interest faster than you can pay it off. Okay, that's exactly what happens here. Now, the reason that this steals our wealth is we are what's used to pay it off. Okay, the United States government does not have a service that it provides. It taxes us. So when it can't, pay its bills, which it can't right now, it's insolvent. It does not have the money to actually meet its budget. It has to raise taxes. Okay, in 1913, the highest tax rate was 7%. 7% was the highest income tax rate. Today, the highest income tax rate is 37%. If you do the math on that, that means that taxes have increased at an annual compounding rate of 1.5% to 2% a year. So these two things are very linked. Okay, we increase the money supply, meaning the Fed loans money to the Treasury borrows money from the Fed, however you want to look at it. It dilutes the value or the buying power of the dollars that we currently have in existence, meaning you and I work harder and harder to buy less things. That's part one. Part two is because the Treasury borrowed money from the Fed, they now owe interest to the Fed, which they can't pay. So then they have to raise taxes on us so that they can pay the interest. Okay. So here's how this would be if we didn't have this happening. Imagine things didn't get more expensive. Okay. We have some older people on the feed. Respect the hell out of you guys because you've seen all this happen. Remember when you could buy a car for $3,000? Not a hoopty like a beater with a heater. You could buy a new car for $3,000. You could buy a house for $30,000. Gas with 30 cents a gallon. Like all of those are real things that decades ago were the case. What if they still were? Okay, because this is what we're talking about, because the car did not get more valuable or more expensive. It's actually cheaper to manufacture a car today than it probably was 30 years ago. Okay, there's less metal. It's all fiberglass and machines and less employees. And like, it's just easier for somebody to make a car today. Milk didn't get more expensive. Bread didn't get more expensive. Stamps didn't get more expensive. None of those things actually have more intrinsic value to justify the price increase. So the only thing left remaining is the dollar doesn't buy as much. And so it takes more dollars to buy the same things. Okay. So if we got rid of inflation, then it would take the same dollars to buy those things today as it took back then. Meaning that I could probably buy a car for $3,000 right now instead of spending 40. I could buy a house for 30,000 instead of spending 300,000. How much more money could I keep if I didn't have to spend more money on goods and services? How much more could I save? How much more could I invest? Okay, so that would be the case if we didn't have inflation. We do have inflation. We do have all this stuff going on that I mentioned. So that's how it steals our wealth. Okay, the things don't actually cost more. They just take more dollars to buy the same stuff. Now, on the flip side of it is taxes. Okay, I have a couple clients on here that are tax planning clients of ours, and they understand the beauty of not paying taxes. And I'm talking legally. I'm not talking about tax evasion, right? So imagine if you worked and kept 100% of your check. Okay, I'm in California right now. I've got a client here in California, texted me his first big commission check. And Andre's laughing just at the idea of keeping 100% of your check. But my client here in California, half his income is gone. So he made like 30,000 gross, sent me a picture of his pay stub. His net pay was like 15 grand. Okay. Because he's single. He lives in California, highest tax brackets he could pay. Okay. So imagine if he kept the full 30, how much more could he save? How much more could he invest? This ripple effect is huge. If I didn't have to spend 300 grand on a house, and it only cost me 30,000, let me ask you, do I really even need a mortgage? Do you see what that does for me? If I don't need a mortgage and I can just drop $30,000 on a house and be done with it, right? Or on the tax thing, like I don't have to worry about putting money in a 401k or putting money in an HSA or hiding it away in this place or that place. My client here is watching, like we just went through this with him. He understands that there's so many things we have to do to get rid of taxes. Most people don't know how to do them, so they end up just paying the taxes. Right? But imagine if that wasn't the case. So it is the case. And if I don't know this information, then what I'm going to say and how I'm going to respond is, well, things just get more expensive over time. And that's just it. And I leave it there. And then I never actually figured out, no, this is currency devaluation. Now, if currency devaluation happens, then it's important to understand at what rate is it being devalued. Right? Like when I understand these definitions, I can actually start asking the right questions. At what rate is it being devalued? Right? We looked at CPI. If we check CPI, CPI is going to tell you 2 to 3%. But if we look at real inflation, there's a website called Shadow Stats. You can actually look this up. You'll see that real inflation, or the devaluation of our US dollar, happens at a rate of 5 to 6% a year. That's a big difference. That's double. That's twice the difference of CPI versus real inflation. Right? So if I understand that the currency is being devalued at a rate of 5% a year, it means that if I'm not increasing my income by at least 5% every year, I'm actually going backwards. It takes me a 5% incremental annual increase just to stay where I'm at. Okay. My pay raise, if I'm a W-2 employee, is probably only 2 or 3% if I even get one. It's not 5%. Right? So what am I doing to increase my income by 5%? The other thing that we looked at today is that we are what's utilized to pay off the national debt. We are what's utilized to pay off what the Treasury owes the Federal Reserve Bank. I don't like that. That's financial slavery. Like legit 100%. It doesn't matter your age, gender, skin color. Like that's slavery. All of us are in that boat. None of us agree with slavery. So let's look at that and call it what it is. The Fed loans money to the Treasury, and the Treasury taxes our work, which is our life, our sweat, our tears, our talent, our ethic, in order to pay its bills. That is slavery. So I don't like that. If I don't like that, what can I do about it? Again, I can't even begin to ask that question if I don't understand what's actually going on here. So when I learned this, I decided what I can do about it is I can replace my income with passive income. so that I don't have to work, so that the Fed and the Treasury tax these random, objects and assets and real estate and debt and other things that I invest in that produce my income for me. And I'm free to go do whatever the hell I want to do. Okay. Because the idea of I have to work at a job, like, that's not actually true. I don't have to work at a job. There's plenty of people that don't. But it's, can I replace my income? Okay, if I can replace my income, then I don't have to work at a job. But if I can't, then yeah, I do. So I've got to replace my income with passive income. That's the goal. And I've got a couple of obstacles. I also have to then look at, what am I saving? Well, if inflation's happening and I'm not increasing my income, I'm going to save less and less because things cost more and more. And so I'm going to have less and less left over. If taxes keep going up because the Treasury keeps borrowing money from the Fed, then I'm going to have even less than that, because by the time they tax me and I get my net income, there's nothing left over. Do you guys see how interlinked all this stuff is? This is what no one's talking about in 2020. Okay, we're talking about elections. We're talking about riots. We're talking about, coronavirus. We're not talking about the fact that the performance of the Dow Jones is a 90% correlation to money printed in 2020. We're not talking about the fact that 23% of the Russell 3000 stock market can't afford to pay its interest on its debt right now. We're not talking about 40% of all dollars in existence were created in the year 2020. We're not talking about the fact that the Fed has the highest balance sheet it's ever had, and they're buying debt from corporations that can't stay afloat. We're going to talk about some of those things next week. Okay, but that's really what's happening in 2020. We have printed more money than we've ever printed this year. Okay, we have lowered interest rates. That's the other thing, is when we lower interest rates, it encourages borrowing. Right? Objectively speaking, that might not sound bad, but look back at that cycle. We had the Treasury and the Fed. We said the Treasury issues a bond, aka it borrows money from the Fed. Okay. As a borrower, what happens when interest rates go up? What are you less inclined to do? You're less inclined to borrow, right? What happens when interest rates go down? What are you more inclined to do? You're more inclined to borrow. So with the Fed dropping their interest rate, what are they trying to get companies and governments to do? They're trying to get them to borrow money. Okay. When we borrow money, it creates more currency because that money didn't exist. They're borrowing from the Fed. The Fed doesn't have money. The Fed literally writes a blank check. It's actually just digits on a screen. You can watch Ben Bernanke back in 2008 or 2009. He was the chairman of the Federal Reserve. In an interview, he said, well, we just sort of type numbers in on the computer. And that's how we create currency. And they create it out of thin air. So when a loan happens, there's not actually real money back behind it. So that's adding more to the currency pool, which is diluting the value of the currency. And this thing just starts compounding. Okay, it just starts compounding and getting out of control. So I know I went off on a tangent there, but that's inflation. So a couple points that I want to go over. The US dollar is controlled by a central bank. Okay. If you don't know what a central bank is, that's what we've been talking about tonight. The Federal Reserve Bank is a central bank. Okay. Central banks are private corporations that provide currency to countries. They loan it to them to indebt and enslave that country to the bank so that that country and its citizens have to pay the bank interest via taxation. Okay. That's what a central bank is. There's central banks in almost every country in the world today. I actually don't think I know of a country that doesn't have a central bank, which means every single country is run by a bank. Okay, because what if the bank just says, sorry, no, we're not going to loan you money anymore? Okay, the country can't pay its bills. It's already in a budget deficit. So what if that loaning source leaves? How much leverage does the bank have over the country at that point? Okay, what's even creepier, and I'm not into politics at all, but in 2021, they're looking at making a lady named Janet Yellen the treasury of the secretary. The secretary of the Treasury. Janet Yellen was the chairman of the Fed back before Jerome Powell. So she's the person that ran the central bank at one point. She's now going to be running the treasury of the United States government. Okay. Her and the central bank are going to have a time. Like, they're going to have so much money passed back and forth. It's going to be unbelievable. Okay. So these banks, like, they're run by bankers. Okay. The central bank has owners. It's not us. It's not the government. Okay. The owners of the Federal Reserve Bank are members, and they make a 6% dividend on the profits of the central bank. The Federal Reserve Bank is the second most profitable entity in the United States, next to Berkshire Hathaway. I want you to think about that. The second most profitable entity in the United States, next to freaking Warren Buffett's company. Okay. That's who runs our monetary system. That's who's printing all this money. That's who's lowering all the interest rates, and they're making a damn killing doing it. So it's important to understand this information because it impacts all of us. It impacts our futures. It impacts literally almost every single war that's ever happened, almost every single famine that's ever happened, almost every single invasion that's ever happened has happened because of the Federal Reserve Bank. They've been closely tied. Okay, so the United States dollar is controlled by a central bank. The central bank loans money to the Treasury. The Treasury owes the central bank interest. We then work for those dollars. Now, check this out. They loan it to the Treasury. They don't loan it directly to us. So it's a trickle-down effect, but it's not the one you're used to hearing about. So it goes central bank, Treasury, then it goes, government employees, war. That's one of the primary things we spend on. Interest back to the Fed, public works, and it trickles down into the economy. By the time you get it and I get it, we get it last. Okay. Remember we said when we introduce it to the currency pool, it dilutes the value of the currency. Well, the government gets to use it before it's introduced. Okay. It's literally the difference between a stock that is sold pre-IPO, initial public offering, and post-IPO. Pre-IPO, all of the Wall Street firms go in and they buy it while it still has value and it's the cheapest. And then they release it to everybody else and it rides the value of it. And then they sell the crap out on everybody else at a profit and everyone else loses their money. The same effect happens here. The dollar gets introduced to the Treasury. The Treasury gets most of the value first. Okay. They spend it on war. They spend it on interest. They spend it on public works, all this stuff. Okay. And then we get it at the end. By the time we get it, think of it as a cigar. It's down to the filter. It's been smoked. It's gone. Okay. There's nothing good left on it. It's been devalued. It's nasty. Okay. So that literally is what's happening. We end up working for those dollars so that we can pay the interest to the Fed. Okay. We do it through our taxation, right? And then the next step in the equation is we pay taxes on the dollars. And then what happens is we give our money to the bank. So we work for the dollars, we pay taxes on the dollars, then we give our dollars to the bank. The bank then loans all of our dollars out to other people and the process repeats and we get nothing on those deposits. Guys, this entire thing is a scam. This is what our country has been built on for over 100 years. Okay, we're in 2020. This started happening in 1913. Okay, there's numerous quotes by bankers. Let me read a couple of them off to you so you can understand like the gravity of this. Quotes from central bankers. Let's read a couple of them. That run the banking system. Okay, the guys that are actually in charge of it. Let me pull a couple of these up. Here we go. 25 central bank quotes. I want to read some of these too because they're eerie. I've spent years and years studying this. This is from Thomas Jefferson. Okay, Thomas Jefferson, good dude. We can all agree on that, right? The central bank is an institution of the most deadly hostility existing against the principles and form of our Constitution. Okay, that's from freaking Thomas Jefferson, guys. Like, this is not Jerry Fetta's opinion. This is what's happening. This is what has happened. That's Thomas Jefferson, one of our founding fathers, says the central bank is an institution of the most deadly hostility existing against the principles and form of our Constitution. Here's an example of that. Did you know that it's unconstitutional for the US dollar to be anything but gold? In the Constitution, it literally says that the dollar is gold. That's it. Okay. The central bank got rid of that. We got off the gold standard in 1971. That was driven by central banks. Okay. In the Constitution, taxation is not legal. Income tax is not legal by Constitution definition. Now, you can be one of those weird people that's like, fine, then I'm not going to pay it. It's the mafia. Like, they're still going to take you to prison and put you in a cage if you don't. Just because it's unconstitutional doesn't mean that matters to them. But what I'm saying is the existence of this system is unconstitutional, and that comes from Thomas Jefferson himself. Another quote. James A. Garfield, whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. What are we seeing today? We're seeing the entire stock market being inflated and controlled by the Federal Reserve. The Fed prints money, the market goes up. Is that not the absolute master of all industry and commerce? Like by definition. Another one, Henry Ford. Henry Ford says, it is well enough that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. That's Henry Ford, guys. Ford Motors. Another one here, Abraham Lincoln. The money power preys on the nation in times of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. It is more despotic than monarchy. So he's saying it's worse than having a king, more insolent than autocracy, and more selfish than bureaucracy. It denounces as public enemies all who question its methods or throw light upon its crimes. That's Abraham Lincoln talking about central banks. Thomas Jefferson again. I sincerely believe that the banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. Holy cow. Let me repeat that. Thomas Jefferson says, I sincerely believe that the banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale. So he's saying it's robbing our kids and grandkids of their futures. Woodrow Wilson. So this is the quote. Woodrow Wilson, in my opinion, is the worst president in United States history, because he was the one that actually caused this. Like, he allowed them to put the central bank in force. He wrote it into law. Woodrow Wilson says, this is after him signing the central bank into law, I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated, meaning it's concealed to a group of small people. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most competent, or one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government ruled by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Wow. So I wanted to read that because that, like, to me, gives such good reality on what actually has been going on. These are not new quotes. You can go look them up yourself. Okay, these are all things that have been around for hundreds of years. Okay, and it's true stuff. So as we're watching this, and I'm going to open this up for our live Q&A in a few minutes. As we're watching this, I want you to realize, like, number one, this is very real. Okay, this is the reason why in 2016 I quit my financial advising business and gave it away. Because I was selling crap that didn't solve the problem. It did not help people. Mutual funds can't help someone out of this. Okay. Don says, quote, Meyer Rothschild. Okay, so he has one. Let me look that quote up really quick, because that's probably the most insidious one I've ever seen. Meyer Rothschild quote. So Rothschild is the guy that basically was like the patriarch behind the banking system. So he has a quote here. Who controls the issuance of money is who controls the government. He has another quote that's something along the lines of, give me control over a nation's currency system and I care not who governs it. So that's Meyer Rothschild. But guys, as you're reading this, like, I want you to realize this is real stuff. Okay, it's really easy to hear this tonight and be like, oh, that's just another conspiracy, like election fraud or like coronavirus or whatever else. No, this is freaking since 1913 in our country. Prior to that, it happened in England in the 1600s. Okay, the Bank of England, like, this is kind of where it all started. So I want you to realize this is like centuries and centuries and centuries of years, like, of the same behavior, the same wars, the same taxes, the same everything. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is real. Okay. Now, if it's real, that means we have to solve it. Okay. Like, if I told you it's real that you're going to get punched in the face tomorrow, you would be on defense. You wouldn't be like, oh, that's neat that Jerry told me I'm going to get punched in the face, and then you forget all about it. No, you'd be on guard. Right. So this is something that is happening to you. It is the reason why when you work harder, it does not seem like you have more money. It is the reason why you pay taxes. It is the reason why we have wars. It is the reason why our country's in the situation it's in right now. It's 100% real. So what are you going to do about it? Okay. A couple things we can do about it. We just said we can study it. We can know about it. Okay. We can understand the difference between CPI, consumer price index, and real inflation. We can understand that it's bad when our country borrows money. We can understand that it's bad when we operate at a budget deficit. We can understand that none of our income tax goes to anything but the interest that our government pays to the Federal Reserve Bank. Everyone that's like, I'm okay paying my fair share. Your fair share of the interest, you're already paying your fair share by working for the dollars in the first place. Why do you need to pay more? Right? So all this stuff is solvable. And the most solvable thing about this is two stable points. The inflation rate is 5%. You need to increase your income by at least 5% every single year, or you are sinking further and further and further into the ground. Okay. And working for money is a scam. Doesn't mean you should quit, because if you quit, you're not going to pay your bills and you're not going to be able to do anything. But it does mean you need to replace your income with passive income, which makes what my company is doing and providing for you all the more important. Okay. So those are the points that I want to cover. Now I'm going to open this up for some questions. What we're going to do the same thing tonight that we did last week. So if you're on Zoom and you have questions, put those in the comments and I'll actually go live with you. So we'll turn you on, mic's on, we'll answer it live on the call tonight. Sorry, Facebook and Instagram, you guys don't have the Zoom plugins. I can't do that with your questions. So I'll answer those just normally. And in the meantime, while I'm doing that, if you are on Zoom, go ahead and drop your questions. So when I get to them, I can pull those up and answer them for you. All right, Instagram questions. Thank you everybody on Instagram for tuning in tonight. I know you guys have plenty of things you could be doing. Learning about money is not, actually to me, it is the most exciting thing, but for a lot of people it wouldn't be. So I appreciate everyone coming on. Tadroki, good to see you, man. Okay, so official 100 says, how can I become rich? So rich, in my opinion, just means you earn a lot of income. So you can become rich by exchanging lots with other people. But I would challenge you not to become rich, become wealthy. Okay, become financially free. Those are the real targets we should be going after. No one ever talks about that. They talk about rich. Rich means that I have a good income and I rent a Lambo. Okay, that's a big difference between I don't have to work ever again for the rest of my life. Dogtown T-Dog, good to see you. Bethany, good to see you. Andre, good to see you. Gab says, I like your hat. Thank you. This is our Wealth Dynamics company hat. So on the front here, we've got our logo. We've got purpose, wealth, and freedom. Okay, we actually will have a Shopify store up and running with these probably in about a week or two. So you'll be able to order those on our website. Aaron says, how'd you get so rich? You were broke as fuck. Haha. Made it. You made it, man. Okay. Watch your language, Aaron. Any other questions here? No other questions on Instagram. So guys, we're going to go ahead and log off Instagram. And we're going to tune in on Facebook here and answer questions. Kevin, good to see you. Alex, good to see you. Bryson, good to see you. Liam says, how would assets go up if inflation didn't exist? So they would have to go up based on real value. Like it would have to be, it produced actually like more income, right? Or like intrinsically it's more valuable because there's less supply. And so it's more scarce. Like real things would cause value, which is how it should be. If I'm buying stock, like I should be buying stock based on only one thing, which is earnings. Okay, but you have companies that are pre-earnings that are raising multi-billion dollar valuations, and they have no earnings. So it would have to be based on revenue. It would have to be based on assets. It would have to be based on something intrinsic or internal that actually makes sense as to why that thing is worth what it is. Kevin says, Jerry, invite me to your library behind you. Kevin, I already did. It's called Wealth Dynamics University. You should sign up for it. Daniel says, Daniel's my man. He says, yes, we are on life support with all this money being printed, again, with a new monetary system. That is kind of true. Congress could actually get rid of the Fed if they wanted to. Okay, now they're not gonna, because that's the way things are, and Congress is bought and owned by the Fed. but that's how it would have to go down. So we don't have to rely on politicians. The way out is to actually like build up real assets and replace the income, and it will continue to go down in value over time. It's not going to change, right? So that's something that we have to continue to work on ourselves. And if it gets changed, awesome, but it's probably not going to. Josue says, Jerry, any recommendations on where we can learn more about Andrew Jackson? I don't have any recommendations on that. You probably could see if you wrote an autobiography or anything of that nature. Now, I don't vouch for Andrew Jackson. Like, I don't know anything about him other than his financial stance. I don't know if he is someone you should or shouldn't study, but he definitely was a key player in keeping central banking out of America. Josue posted a quote. I think this is from Meyer Rothschild. Give a man a gun and he can rob a bank. Give a man a bank and he can rob the world. That's true. And I think that is Meyer Rothschild as well. Alex says, WDXU has opened my mind so much more and gives me the resources I need to execute. That's awesome, Alex. That's exactly what it's for. Logan, what's up, man? I think this is Logan. I think, Logan, you're the Logan that I went to high school with, right? I think this is the guy I went to high school with. Logan, love to see you, man. It's awesome having you on here. Let me see what we got here on Zoom. So I'm going to change my mic. And we're going to answer some questions live on Zoom. And check our Zoom questions. All right, great. So we got some questions here on Zoom. Hey, Lexi, can you check the feedback just to make sure there's nothing going on with it? Yeah. Okay, so questions here on Zoom. We have Don says central banks are banking cartels, much like drug cartels. That's extremely true. Okay, Brad has a question. So Brad Reese has a question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Brad, so you can ask this online here.
Jerry, can you hear me?
I can, Brad. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
My question is, what are your thoughts on the Banking for All Act that Congress introduced, and it corresponded with the stock market crash and the possible Fed coin, which is a digital coin like Bitcoin, that we would actually have an account directly tied to the Federal Reserve? Sounds scary to me. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Brad. So Brad is saying, so there's a banking bill that was introduced to Congress. It has not been passed yet. It's called the Banking for All Act. Now, the proposed deadline on the bill is December 31st of 2020. So we've got like 2 weeks. We'll watch it and see what happens. But basically, yeah, that's going to elect that the Federal Reserve Bank will come out with its own digital currency. Every single one of us as U.S. citizens is going to get a digital wallet. It's either going to be through our banking institution, or get this, if it's not through the banking institution, it'll be routed through the postal service. And so basically what will happen is the Fed will be able to pay direct money to us through that digital currency to those bank accounts. Now, I'm not for this at all. Personally, I think that if that happens, like we're going down a very slippery slope. What that does is it allows the Fed to directly inject currency into the system, and to, number one, control our behavior. Like they can decide when we get paid, when we don't get paid, right? They, on the Banking for All Act, if you look in the act, it says that something along the lines that the account will have an interest rate. It does not specify that it will earn an interest rate. It just says something along the lines that it will have one, which means that it could potentially be negative. Okay, negative means if you put money in, your money starts going down in value faster than it usually would. So what could happen is you can get money in that account, and then if you don't spend it within a certain amount of time, it starts dwindling in value because of the negative interest rate. So they would be able to say, hey, if you don't spend this on X, Y, and Z by this date, it's going to go down in value. And so you're more controlled into spending it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they'll be able to track your data via transactions.
So they'll be able to see what you buy, what you spend on, and all these things. So I don't like it at all. And so my thought is that if that happens, that's one more degree of freedom that we'll lose economically. So I just won't use it. I think what's going to happen is the next round of stimulus or one of the rounds after that will probably get released with FedCoin, with your Fed digital wallet, and people will be enticed to sign up because it's like there's $2,000 sitting in that account that's free. So that's kind of my thought on it. But Brad, what is your thought?
My thought is the same, and I think it's actually more scary than that. I think it's going to get if I think they're pushing for it. I mean, what I see right now is by them, increasing 40% in 1 year, the amount of money is to push out the middle class and make us basically pawns or serfdom. And I also see that they could control us from getting on planes because, you didn't meet the social, whatever you want to call it. You didn't meet their standards, and it could get very nasty. My question on top of that is that, I mean, looking at it right now, investing in gold and silver or gold seems like prudent play to even go farther, get more physical gold because of how this is being played out. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. So, I mean, with gold and silver, it's something that has intrinsic value, right? It's backed our currency system before. It's actually the only currency system that's never failed. So if you look back through our history, for 5 or 6 thousand years, gold has been a currency, and it's the only one that hasn't gone down, meaning it hasn't crashed, it hasn't been eliminated. So I like it from that standpoint. And it is something that I think, stocking up on more of is a good idea. We actually just launched our bullion store because of that. So now if you go to metals.wealthdynamics.com, you can actually go buy physical gold and silver from us online. So I think it's a great play. Now I'm more heavy on gold right now because I'm less speculative. It's more of a safety and security play. If it's something where I'm trying to catch the upward jump, I'd be more heavily in silver. So I'm still doing a little bit of silver, but mostly gold here. But I think that's a great defense play, and I think that's probably the right move right now.
Cool. Thanks, Jerry.
You bet, Brad. All right, so let me see what other questions we have here tonight. Okay, Don has a question. Now, I want to change my speaker really quick, Don, before I mute you, just because I'm getting some feedback on my end. I don't think you guys are. Lexi, are you hearing any feedback? Okay, so I think it's just in my ears, which is good. So let me go ahead and join in and use this for speaker. Okay, good. That should be much better. So Don, let me go ahead and unmute you so you can ask your question here as well. All right, Don, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can. How are you doing tonight?
Very well, very well.
Awesome, awesome. So your question is, do we ever truly own our houses?
True, or real estate, period. We always hear about how real estate is such a great deal, but in my thoughts, we never truly own any of it. And in fact, if the government wanted to take it all back, all they have to do is keep jacking the taxes up on it and higher and higher and higher. And after a while, you can't pay it.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. So what Don is saying is that property taxes can always go up. And so because of that, it is questionable if we ever actually own the real estate ourselves. I don't personally buy a lot of real estate. I like lending on it because I would rather own the debt or the income on the real estate than the real estate by itself. And so that's one of the reasons, I would personally rather be a lender than a buyer. I think if you're buying real estate, you should be doing it for either income or tax benefits or both, and probably have the mindset that you don't really own it and it could go away anytime.
True. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure. So that was Don. Let me see what other questions we have here tonight. Brian Carmen, good to see you. Okay, that's all the questions I see there. Let me see if we have any in the chat or in the Q&A box. Okay, good. So I think that's all the questions we have on Zoom. Let me see if we have any more on Facebook before we wrap up here tonight. So Daniel wants to know who proposed the Banking for All Act. Daniel, if you go to congress.gov and find that proposed bill, you'd be able to see who proposed and introduced it. I'm not usually interested in who proposed it. I'm interested in who paid the lawyers that wrote the bill, who then gave it to the lobbyists that bribed the congressman to then introduce it, which we probably would never find that out. But okay, good. We have a couple questions about the new bullion site. So you can buy gold and silver bullion from Wealth Dynamics if you go to metals.wealthdynamics.com. You can purchase physical gold and silver bullion from us there. We have a retail site and also a wholesale site if you're doing larger orders. I think that's all the questions we have tonight. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and log out tonight. Thank you all for watching. Tune in again next week. Next week, we will be doing things a little bit different. Friday night is Christmas. So we're going to do a course on Saturday afternoon instead, so everybody can enjoy their Christmas with their family, have some time together, and then Saturday we will hit it hard with a great course. Part 2 of tonight's course, which will be how we are stolen from, the other 2 ways that money is taken from us. Anyways, so we'll log out for tonight. Thank you guys all for watching. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you all next week. Have a Merry Christmas.